Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some pretty intense source material today.
Yeah, it's quite a stack.
15 executive orders.
15? Can you believe that? And all issued on the same day.
January 20th, 2025.
Day one. This new president, I mean, talk about hitting the ground running.
Right. It's not just like, routine stuff
Oh,
either.
no. This is the whole enchilada.
We're talking foreign policy, environmental regulations, even the death penalties in here.
Yeah, it's like they wanted to lay out their entire vision right then and there.
So what do you think that says about this president's style?
I mean, you got to admire the decisiveness, right? But maybe a little, I don't know, impulsive.
Yeah, I'm getting that sense too.
We'll see how it plays out, but definitely makes for a fascinating deep dive.
Absolutely.
Where do you even begin with something like this?
Well, I thought maybe we could start with this one.
America First Policy Directive.
Yeah, to the Secretary of State.
That seems like a pretty good foundation.
It kind of lays the groundwork for everything that follows.
Sets the tone, you know?
And it's pretty strong language, too.
Oh, yeah. No mincing words here.
From this day forward, it says, the foreign policy of the United States shall champion core American interests and always put America and American citizens first.
Wow.
I mean, that's pretty clear, isn't it?
Crystal clear.
It's not just like a general statement of principles.
No. This is a directive.
It actually orders the Secretary of State to realign, well, everything.
Every single foreign policy tool,
Programs, personnel, military operations, you name it.
all geared towards this America First focus.
So I'm wondering, what does that actually look like in practice?
Right. What are the implications here?
Like, what happens to existing international agreements
Yeah.
if they're suddenly seen through this very different lens?
I mean, think about trade deals, for example.
Like NAFTA,
Right. NAFTA or that Trans-Pacific Partnership.
TPP.
Exactly.
If those are suddenly viewed as not putting American citizens first.
Well, this EO could be used to renegotiate them, maybe even withdraw from them completely.
Wow, that would definitely cause some waves.
Absolutely. And it's not just trade.
Right. Military alliances, too, I imagine.
Yeah, we could see a shift away from commitments that are seen as too costly.
Or not directly benefiting the U.S.
Exactly.
So, yeah, definitely some potential for some global shakeups there.
I think that's an understatement.
Okay, well, speaking of shaking things up,
Oh, boy.
let's move on to this EO titled Declaring a National Energy Emergency.
This one's a doozy.
It seems like it has the potential to be really controversial.
It's already generating a ton of debate.
It straight up declares a national emergency based on what it claims is inadequate energy capacity.
But what's really interesting is how it frames the issue, you know?
Right.
It really takes aim at policies in the Northeast and West Coast.
Blaming them for creating this energy crisis.
Exactly, saying they're jeopardizing national security by restricting energy development.
And it's not just talk, either.
Oh, no, this EO is packed with action items,
It proposes some pretty drastic measures to boost domestic energy production.
like giving agencies emergency powers to fast-track projects,
Streamlining permitting processes related to the Clean Water Act.
Endangered Species Act, all that stuff.
And even hints at using eminent domain.
Or the Defense Production Act.
I mean, that's serious stuff.
It is.
And the focus is clearly on increasing production, including fossil fuels.
Even if it means, sidelining environmental concerns.
So is this a legitimate response to a real energy crisis?
Or are they sacrificing the environment for short-term economic gain?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
And it's one that's going to be fiercely debated.
Yeah, people are already taking sides.
Drawing battle lines, for sure.
Before we get too deep into that, though,
Right, good point.
I want to take a look at this other EO.
Okay, which one?
This one is called,
Establishing and implementing the President's Department of Government Efficiency.
yeah, that's the one.
Sounds pretty dry, right?
It does, at first glance.
But then you get to the name they've given this whole initiative.
The Duo-G agenda.
DOG. As in, like, the meme.
The Shiba Inu meme.
I couldn't believe it when I saw that.
Me neither. It seems like such an odd choice for a government program,
It's certainly unexpected.
What do you make of it?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Maybe they're trying to make government seem more, I don't know, approachable.
Less stuffy, more relatable.
Or maybe it's a sign that they're really serious about technology and innovation.
Even if it means using, internet humor to do it.
So what does this DOG agenda actually entail?
Well, beyond the name,
Right.
there are some concrete steps outlined here.
For example, they're renaming the U.S. Digital Service.
To the U.S. DOG service.
Still USDS for short, though.
Yeah, thankfully.
And they're mandating that every federal agency create these DOGE teams.
Dedicated to modernizing their IT systems and software.
Big job.
Huge, yeah.
The goal is to improve data integrity, make different systems work together better,
Interoperability, that's the key word.
and give the USDS full access to agency data.
While still protecting privacy, of course.
That's a lot to juggle.
A lot of moving parts, for sure.
There's also this interesting line in the EO.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It says that this order overrides any previous orders that might conflict with it.
Wow, so they're really serious about pushing these changes through.
Seems that way.
I guess we'll see if a meme-inspired name can actually translate into real improvements in government efficiency.
Right. That's the big question.
Only time will tell.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Sure.
And talk about this EO titled Organization of the National Security Council and Subcommittees.
This one sounds a little dry.
It does, but the changes it proposes are anything but.
It's actually a pretty significant restructuring.
Yeah, it emphasizes what it calls a whole-of-government approach to national security.
What does that mean, practically speaking?
Well, for one thing, they're expanding the NSC to include the Attorney General,
And the Secretary of the Interior.
giving them a direct voice in these critical decisions.
Interesting.
They're also formally absorbing the Homeland Security Council into the NSC structure.
Okay, so centralizing things a bit more.
Yeah, streamlining decision-making, you know,
It even lays out specific procedures for handling disagreement.
and escalating issues to the president.
So more power in the hands of the executive branch.
It's certainly one way to interpret it.
Is that a good thing? I mean, it could lead to faster decisions,
Right.
but maybe also less diverse perspectives, less debate.
Some important questions to consider there.
Definitely something to keep an eye on.
So we've only just scratched the surface here, right?
Yeah, we've got 10 more EOs to go.
To give you a taste of what's ahead,
A little preview.
let's do a quick rundown of some of the other issues being tackled.
Buckle up. It's a wild ride.
We've got promoting beautiful federal civic architecture.
That's a new one.
It basically directs the government to develop a more visually appealing style for federal buildings.
So like an aesthetic makeover.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Then we've got a cluster of EOs focused on immigration and border security.
Oh boy, here we go.
Things like protecting the American people against invasion.
And protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship.
These propose some pretty sweeping changes.
Restricting birthright citizenship,
Bolstering border security.
political barriers, increased personnel, the whole 9 yards.
Then there's the environment.
Another hot button issue.
EOs like putting people over fish,
Stopping radical environmentalism to provide water to Southern California.
unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential.
These all seem to prioritize economic development and resource extraction.
Even if it means rolling back environmental protections.
A lot of potential for controversy there.
And then we've got EOs dealing with foreign aid, global taxes,
Things like reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid.
and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Global Tax Deal. Global Tax Deal.
These suggest a potential shift away from international cooperation.
More of a go-it-alone approach.
Definitely a different tone from the previous administration.
And finally, we've got EOs that deal with the internal workings of the government.
Like what?
Things like restoring accountability for career senior executives.
And restoring the death penalty
Yeah.
and protecting public safety. So this is about more than just policy.
It's about power, too.
Yeah, the president's power within the government itself.
Big questions being raised here.
About the balance of power, presidential authority, all that
A
stuff.
lot to unpack.
A lot to digest.
So are you ready to dive deeper into some of these individual EOs?
Absolutely. I'm fascinated to see how all this plays out.
Me too, me too.
Let's pick one and really get into the weeds.
Okay, how about we start with... Okay, so we're back and ready to dig a little deeper into some of these executive orders.
Lots to unpack here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's remarkable the sheer scope of this thing, you know?
Absolutely. It really does touch on almost every aspect of government.
And it's not just like tinkering around the edges either.
No, this is like fundamental shifts in some cases.
All right. Well, I thought maybe we could start with...
Where to even begin?
Well, we were talking about the America First policy earlier.
Right.
And I was really struck by this EO on reevaluating and realigning United States foreign aid.
Yeah, that's a big one.
I mean, it basically puts all foreign aid on hold
Until it's been reviewed, yeah.
to make sure it aligns with the president's foreign policy goals.
It's a pretty significant move.
Think about it. I mean, the U.S. is like a major provider of aid globally, right?
Oh, absolutely. Billions of dollars every year.
So this EO is signaling a potential shift, I think.
Away from traditional alliances and partnerships.
Yeah, maybe even a rethinking of the whole idea of foreign aid.
It could have huge repercussions for countries that rely on that aid.
And for organizations, too, like NGOs and charities.
Right, the whole landscape could change.
I'm curious, what criteria are they going to use to decide if aid is aligned with this new foreign policy?
Good question. The EO doesn't really go into specifics.
Will it be purely economic interests, you think?
It's possible, but there could be other factors at play too.
What about humanitarian aid, though?
Right, like responding to famines or natural disasters.
Is that going to be subject to the same America First lens?
That's something we'll have to watch closely, I think, as this policy is implemented.
It's a little unsettling, to be honest.
I understand that. There's a lot of uncertainty right now.
Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another area where we're seeing some major changes.
You mean immigration?
Yeah, there are several EOs aimed at curbing illegal immigration.
And strengthening border security.
Right, it's a whole package of measures.
Some of them pretty controversial, I'd say.
Like this one, protecting the meaning and value of American citizenship.
That's the one that seeks to restrict birthright citizenship, right?
Exactly, for children of undocumented immigrants.
I mean, that's a huge change.
And it's almost certainly going to face legal challenges.
Oh, absolutely. The 14th Amendment is pretty clear on that.
But even if it were somehow upheld, how would you even enforce such a policy?
Right, it's a logistical nightmare.
Would hospitals be required to report the immigration status of parents?
Would children born here be denied birth certificates?
It's just, I don't even know where to begin with that one.
It's definitely a can of worms.
Yeah, big time.
There's also that EO on realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program,
Right, which suspends the program entirely.
citing national security concerns.
That seems like a huge departure from the U.S.'s historical role.
As a leader in refugee resettlement,
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. has always been a beacon of hope for people fleeing persecution
this EO signals a pretty significant retreat from that role.
and raises some serious concerns about the humanitarian impact.
What happens to the people who are already in the process of seeking asylum?
What about those who are now fleeing war or oppression with nowhere to turn?
It's a really tough situation.
Okay, and then there's this other EO on protecting the United States from foreign terrorists and other national security and public safety threats.
That one sounds pretty standard on the surface.
Yeah, it directs agencies to enhance vetting and screening of immigrants and refugees.
Which, in principle, sounds reasonable.
Right, but it really depends on how it's done, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Increased vetting could be a legitimate way to improve security.
But it's also a slippery slope.
How do you ensure that those criteria are applied fairly and objectively?
Without introducing bias based on religion or ethnicity.
Exactly. There's a real danger of this turning into discriminatory profiling.
Disguised as security.
It's a fine line.
It seems like a lot of these EOs are walking that fine line,
Between security and freedom, economic growth, and environmental protection.
Efficiency and due process.
Yeah, it's a lot of tough choices.
Often there's no easy answer.
No clear right or wrong.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about one EO that really embodies those tough choices.
Which one are you thinking of?
Restoring the death penalty and protecting public safety.
Yes, that's a big one.
It directs the Attorney General to pursue the death penalty more aggressively.
Including for certain crimes committed by undocumented immigrants.
And it also takes a swipe at the previous administration for commuting some death row sentences.
So it's clearly sending a message.
Tough on crime, law and order.
But it also reignites this whole debate about the death penalty.
Is it moral? Is it effective?
And it raises questions about due process and equal protection under the law.
Will undocumented immigrants facing the death penalty have access to adequate legal representation?
Will their cases be handled fairly?
These are serious concerns.
That go beyond the philosophical debate about capital punishment itself.
Right, it gets really complicated really quickly.
Yeah, there are a lot of layers to this one.
Okay, well, let's step back from the heavy stuff for a moment.
Sure, good idea.
And revisit that EO we talked about earlier, the one with the peculiar name.
The DOGE agenda.
Yeah, that's the one, establishing and implementing the President's Department of Government Efficiency.
It's like they're trying to make government cool,
With a meme.
It's a bold strategy.
But let's focus on the substance for a minute.
Okay, what are they actually proposing?
Well, they're calling for the creation of these DOGE teams in every federal agency.
Tasked with upgrading IT systems and software.
Modernizing the whole government, basically.
It's a tall order.
The goal is to improve data integrity, make sure different systems can talk to each other,
Interoperability, that's the key.
and give the USDS full access to agency data while still protecting privacy.
Right, right.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is, but if they can pull it off,
It could have a huge impact on how efficiently the government operates.
potentially, yeah.
But the federal government has a long history of struggling with technology, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah, remember healthcare.gov?
That was a mess.
A total disaster.
So can these DOGE teams actually overcome that inertia?
The bureaucratic hurdles, the resistance to change.
And can they do it while also ensuring data security and privacy?
Those are the million-dollar questions.
All right, let's shift gears again.
Sure, where to next?
Energy policy.
Another big one.
Yeah, the EO declaring a national energy emergency.
That one goes beyond just expressing concern, you know,
Oh yeah, it actually declares a national emergency.
and calls for sweeping actions to boost domestic production,
And it specifically targets policies in the Northeast and West Coast
blaming them for creating this supposed emergency.
by restricting development of traditional energy sources like oil and gas.
Right, so it's pretty clear where their priorities lie.
Increased production, even if it means,
Rolling back environmental regulations?
and potentially accelerating climate change.
That's the concern, isn't it?
They talk about streamlining permitting processes, but they also mention the possibility of using eminent domain
Or the Defense Production Act.
to overcome any obstacles.
That's where it gets really tricky.
Yeah, those are powerful tools,
Eminent domain allows the government to seize private property.
even if the owner doesn't want to sell.
The Defense Production Act gives the president the power to direct private companies to produce goods.
Deemed essential for national security.
So imagine those powers being used to force through pipelines.
Or oil drilling projects.
regardless of the local opposition.
Or the environmental impact.
It's a scary thought for a lot of people.
This EO is a pretty clear signal that this administration is willing to put energy independence first.
Even if it means putting environmental concerns on the back burner.
Yeah, it's setting up a major clash.
Between those who see this as necessary to ensure American energy security,
And those who believe it's a reckless gamble with the planet's future.
it's a debate that's not going away anytime soon
And it raises some really fundamental questions.
about the limits of presidential power.
And the balance between economic growth and environmental protection. And this energy-focused agenda, it doesn't end there either.
Oh, no, there's more.
We also have unleashing Alaska's extraordinary resource potential.
Which does what, exactly?
It promotes development of oil, gas, and minerals in Alaska.
By reversing environmental protections put in place by the previous administration.
Exactly.
So, more potential for conflict there.
Yeah, this one is likely to have a significant impact on Alaska's ecosystems.
It's a classic example of the trade-offs we often face.
Between economic development and environmental protection.
Will the potential benefits outweigh the risks?
Tough question.
And then there's unleashing American energy.
Which aims to boost domestic energy production across multiple sectors.
Oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, the whole works.
It rolls back a whole bunch of environmental regulations too.
Arguing that they were burdensome and harmful to the economy.
But critics are saying this is a recipe for environmental disaster.
Increased pollution, habitat destruction, greenhouse gas emissions,
They're warning that this will exacerbate climate change.
and have devastating consequences for future generations.
It's a really stark contrast of perspectives.
Between those who prioritize short-term economic gains,
And those who advocate for long-term environmental sustainability.
it's a debate that's been going on for decades.
Yeah, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, not by a long shot.
Okay, let's talk about one more EO before we move on.
Oh, okay, which one?
This one is generating a lot of buzz, especially in the business world.
What's it called?
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Global Tax Deal. Global Tax Deal.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's a pretty important one.
What does it do?
It basically declares that the OECD Global Tax Deal, which was negotiated by the previous administration, has no effect in the U.S.
So they're pulling out of that agreement.
Yep, citing concerns about sovereignty and economic competitiveness.
Interesting.
This deal was aimed at addressing tax avoidance by multinational corporations,
Making sure they pay their fair share no matter where they operate.
Right, but this administration sees it differently.
More of a threat to American businesses, maybe?
Yeah, they're arguing that it puts U.S. companies at a disadvantage.
So, a more unilateral approach to taxation.
It seems that way.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out on the global stage.
Yeah. Will other countries follow suit?
Will it lead to a trade war?
Lots of questions, not a lot of answers yet.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Foreign aid, immigration, energy policy, taxes,
That's a lot to take in.
and we're not done yet.
There's more.
We still have a few more EOs to unpack,
Like what?
including one that deals with the structure of the National Security Council.
Ooh, that sounds juicy.
Yeah, it touches on the balance of power within the government.
And the role of the president in shaping national security policy.
So, are you ready to tackle the final stretch?
Bring it on. I'm ready for anything.
Okay, we're back.
Ready to tackle the last few of these.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some pretty bold moves so far, but
I feel like they saved some of the most interesting ones for last.
I think you're right.
Especially when it comes to, presidential power.
Right, like how much control does this president actually have?
Within the government itself, yeah.
And that's where this EO titled Organization of the National Security Council and Subcommittees comes in.
Okay, this is the one that restructures the NSC.
It expands the membership,
Adds the Attorney General and the Secretary of the Interior.
giving them a direct say in national security matters.
That's a pretty big change, isn't it?
I think so. It suggests a much broader definition of national security,
Not just military threats anymore.
Right, it's economic security, environmental security, even domestic security now.
Interesting. So it's like a whole of government approach.
Yeah, exactly, and it's not just about adding new voices either.
Right, there's more to it.
This EO also formally integrates the Homeland Security Council into the NSC structure,
Okay, streamlining things a bit.
makes decision-making more efficient, puts more control in the president's hands.
I see, so more power to the executive branch.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think.
How so?
Well, on the one hand, it could lead to more decisive action, right?
Yeah, less bureaucracy, less gridlock.
But on the other hand, it could stifle dissent.
Limit the range of perspectives being considered.
And concentrating power in the executive branch always carries risks,
No matter how good the intentions are.
Right, exactly.
So it's something to watch closely, for sure.
Okay, speaking of concentrating power,
Oh boy, another one.
this EO is called Restoring Accountability for Career Senior Executives.
This sounds like it's about control over the federal bureaucracy.
It is, specifically the Senior Executive Service.
Okay, what's the gist?
Basically, it directs agencies to adopt new performance plans for SES members
Emphasize accountability.
and streamline procedures for, reassigning or removing officials.
Who are deemed to be underperforming.
It's basically a shakeup of the federal workforce,
Wow, that's a big deal.
and it's raising some eyebrows, for sure.
Is this about making the government more efficient?
Or is it about making it more loyal to the president?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it?
Will this lead to a more effective government?
Or will it erode the institutional knowledge and experience that's so important?
And the independence of the civil service, too.
Right, it's a tough balance to strike.
It seems like that's a recurring theme with these EOs,
What do you mean?
This tension between different values and priorities.
Security versus freedom?
Economic growth versus environmental protection.
Efficiency versus due process.
And there's often no easy answer.
No clear right or wrong.
It's about making choices, I guess.
And understanding the trade-offs involved.
All right, let's talk about one last EO that really highlights those trade-offs.
Yeah, which one?
It's called Putting People Over Fish, Stopping Radical Environmentalism to Provide Water to Southern California.
That's quite a title.
It is, and it pretty much sums up the dilemma.
What's the issue here?
Basically, this EO aims to increase water flow to Southern California,
By rolling back environmental protections.
designed to protect endangered species in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta.
Oh, I see. So it's a classic clash between economic needs and environmental concerns.
Exactly. Southern California needs water,
But the Delta is a fragile ecosystem.
home to all sorts of endangered species.
So what's the solution?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Can we meet the needs of people without sacrificing the environment?
It's a challenge.
And not just for California either.
Right, this is a global issue. So we've explored 15 executive orders today.
A whirlwind tour of the new administration's agenda.
What have we learned from all this?
Well, I think we've learned that this president is not afraid to use their power.
To enact their vision for the country.
To challenge the status quo, to overturn previous policies.
To take bold actions, even if it means sparking controversy.
And facing legal challenges.
We've also seen this recurring tension between different values.
Security versus freedom, economic growth versus environmental protection.
Efficiency versus due process, American interests versus global cooperation.
It's a lot to grapple with.
And the long-term consequences of these policies, well, they remain to be seen.
But it's up to us as citizens to stay informed
to engage in these critical debates.
and to hold our leaders accountable.
These executive orders are not just abstract documents.
They have the potential to impact all of our lives.
In very real ways.
So we need to understand what they mean, what choices they represent.
And what implications they hold for the future.
This deep dive has given us a glimpse into the thinking of this new administration.
But the conversation doesn't end here.
No, it's just the beginning.
We need to continue the debate, engage in thoughtful discussion.
And help shape the direction of our country.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a fascinating journey.
We hope you found it insightful.
Stay curious, stay engaged.
And keep exploring. There's always more to learn.